Welcome to another episode of our Merging Minds. Today, we're talking about the new language of the old language industry. And none better than our guests today, Anna and Florian from Slator, who came up with this language and who are here to explain to us what it's all about, what it's not. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Florian, for being here with us. And if you could please introduce yourselves to our broad audience who may not have the pleasure of having talked to you before.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Gabriel, for having us and for having this conversation. So I'm Anna Wyndham. I'm head of research at Slator, and our goal is basically to provide insights and analysis of the language industry and provide this in the format of research and other formats in order to give kind of practical insights and data that will help different stakeholders in the industry to make decisions.
Thanks, Anna. So, my name is Florian Faes, based here in Zurich, Switzerland, managing director of Slator. And, we do cover the language industry, which is very much in a state of flux. And that's probably what we want to talk to you today about, that we had to kind of redraw the boundaries of what we typically consider as the language industry, and that's quite the challenging undertaking. So with Slator, we do research, we do conferences. Maybe by the time this comes out, we will be in California, or it will already be passed. So we're doing a conference in Menlo Park. We also publish day-to-day content, and we do a bunch of advisory work. So it's quite an interesting company. And thanks so much, Rodrigo and Gabriel, for having us on today.
Our pleasure. We're huge Slator fans, so we love the content. We love reading some of the research or all of the research. It's great. That's what brought us here. And just quick intros on my end. I'm Gabriel Fairman, founder and CEO of BureauWorks. And Rodrigo, if you'd like to introduce yourself too.
Yes, of course. Hello, I'm Rodrigo Demetrio. I'm in marketing at BureauWorks. So I love when we have the chance to talk about these new names and how we can poke our peers in our industry with new data and information. So yes.
And just to kick things off, Florian and Anna, so in our space, we've had a little acronym soup for a long time: TM, TB, TMS, LSP, blah, 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 right? We've had a lot of acronyms over the years. If I'm not mistaken, in the last LaterCon in Europe, that was the first time, that was a reveal where you guys said, goodbye LSP, welcome LSI and LTP, and goodbye TMS, and welcome LSI and LTP.
With a Japanese illustration.
Yeah. So instead of having me kind of explain that, would love you guys to walk us through what that goodbye is all about.
Maybe you go first, Anna, and then
I'll go first. Well, I think I'll start by reframing it slightly to say that the original goal was not to come up with new terminology or new names necessarily. The goal was to update our understanding of the language industry and try to capture the basics of what's going on in 2025 in terms of what is it, what do we include, who's buying language solutions and technology and why, and who's providing it. Because the industry has changed so dramatically, when a buyer looks out on this landscape today in 2025, they're seeing incredible capabilities and platforms and solutions integrators that didn't exist before. We really felt it was necessary to update our understanding of what the language industry was, to pinpoint what those buyer dynamics were, underlying drivers, and to understand the key types of providers. So we came up with this new framework, and it differs in two ways. The first is that we introduced this distinction between language technology platforms and language solutions integrators. And I think that's what we'll dig into more, these two terms, LTPs and LSIs. But the other thing that we did is that, as Florian was saying, we redrew the boundaries of what we capture inside what we call the language industry. And we thought a little bit harder about what isn't inside the language industry. So in terms of what we capture, in the past, we were mainly focusing on the conversion of text and speech from one language to another. So translation, interpreting, subtitling, and dubbing, basically. And we've expanded that now to include conversion between modes, so speech into text and text into speech. And that lets us bring in AI transcription, AI audio, narration, text to speech. And we also brought in the generation of original multilingual content in the form of text and videos. And this, of course, you can see this change is being prompted by generative AI. So we're now capturing text, audio, video, live interactions, all the different ways of transforming language in those contexts. This redrawing of the map allowed us to come up with a methodology for sizing the market. We've sized the market, Florian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 31.87 billion.
Yeah, 0.7 or 0.8.
In 2025. And the other thing that was key to this exercise was splitting out companies that go to the market with a pure play offering, that are putting technology and tools for transforming language into the hands of buyers, distinguishing them from what we used to call, I guess, language services providers, which are often and usually underpinned by technology and AI capabilities, but go to the market with a very different offering. They're saying, we will manage your language outcomes for you by blending human expertise and technology in the best way to get you to the outcome that you want. So let us handle it all the way to the end. There's so many metaphors for that, getting to the end, like last mile and so on, the finish line, or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, so this was the basic premise behind the new framework. Then of course we went through the exercise of coming up with the names for those two categories.
That makes a lot of sense, and I didn't think about it before, of starting from the buyer perspective. That makes sense. I was thinking about it a little bit differently, but just to recap, to make sure that I'm understanding correctly and our audiences as well. So before, we were working with two main terms, at least if I'm understanding, that we're kind of replacing. We had the language service provider, which was basically a translation agency of any kind. Maybe they were doing interpreting, maybe they were doing translation, maybe both, but they were an agency. Their model is capturing work from their clients, sending it out to resources, vendors who perform the work, getting it back, performing quality checks, delivering it, right? So that would be the language service provider. And then the other big term, the TMS, the translation management system term, which would be basically a system that these LSPs would buy, or systems that they would buy to run their stuff, right? So am I correct in understanding that those are the two terms that we're mainly replacing? Or, because I'm also hearing that maybe this is part of a bigger shift.
Much bigger, yeah, because in the past we actually did not differentiate between, and this may sound slightly academic to some of the people who are not super steeped in like research, right? But like in the past we didn't differentiate between the TMS market, as it were, and the LSP market, and maybe the machine translation market, and all these substreams, right? And also what you describe is basically in a text content world, but we've also expanded in the past 5, 6, 7 years to go much more into the multimodal, right? Video, audio, dubbing, captioning, etc. We started to cover this, and then with this most recent report and the reframing of the market, we expanded. And that's why the market is now bigger, right? We went from something like 26 billion to now almost 32 billion. It's because we basically expanded the scope of what the market is and introduced this differentiation on the vendor side, LSIs and LTPs, which actually before we didn't have. So you can't just say, okay, what used to be LSP is now LSI, and what used to be TMS is now LTP. Kind of far from it. It's not that neat. It's just we expanded the market and we added these two segments of vendors. But there's a lot more complexity below that, and a lot more angles to look at the industry. And I think just to close on that, I think the multimodal aspect, the audio, the video, that aspect really plays a huge role, because if you speak to a Netflix, to a Disney, to any of these other big streamers, if you talk to a creator, if you talk to a dubbing studio, if you talk to a captioning or a live kind of broadcast captioning company, they didn't think in terms of TMS and LSP. They had totally different terms, right? So now we're basically, our framework now captures the entirety of what we consider the language industry, which is also somewhat academic. Others could draw the line narrower or bigger, but we drew it the way we did now.
In that aspect, I have a question. So I've never really understood the size of our industry. I've seen so many different numbers over the past years. And I think one big number that I always see consistently is something around 60 billion to 70 billion. And your number is around 30 billion, 31 billion. Do you happen to have any idea of why there's such discrepancy in how people measure our space?
And can I do a flippant comment and then let you do the nuanced reply? So my initial one would be, I don't know, it's maybe like Swiss conservatism versus maybe more US, kind of just a little bit bolder there. So we want to be conservative. We feel that our estimate is close to what we feel is kind of the narrow language industry as we see it. And you could draw the line, as I said, much wider. You can include many more kind of adjacent services that we didn't, right? So let me give you one example and then pass over to Anna. Like data for AI, right? A lot of LSIs, language solutions integrators, have expanded into providing all kinds of data services for big technology companies. We don't include that in our estimate. There's dozens and dozens of other such services that we don't, like staffing and things like that, which, it's just not part. If you include them too, like where does it end? Like you end up with basically just sizing the software and services market.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe Anna, you want to add to that?
Yeah. Well, as you said, one of the key differences relates to what's included, what's not included. So in our market report, we clearly list out what we do include as part of the industry. What we don't include, as Florian mentioned, is the data for AI industry, which underpins a lot of AI model building. We also exclude foundational AI infrastructure. I don't think any other methodology does include it, but that exclusion was an important part of understanding what the industry is and isn't. So this is the question of OpenAI and Meta provide translation capabilities. So are they part of the translation or language industry in general? And we had a lot, I don't know how many discussions we had internally about the difficulties and the pros and cons of understanding this as part of our industry. In the end, we decided not to include it as part of the industry on two grounds. One is that those companies go to market with a much broader proposition than we transform language for you. They have much more ambitious AGI ideas and obviously much broader applications. And the second is that it's very difficult to get a figure. And really the goal was to come up with a meaningful, a definition of what's included and a meaningful market figure attached to that. So that's one reason why figures might be different. Another aspect to consider is the way that revenue flows through the language industry. And it's really, as much as we would like to sometimes segment it out as a very neat, maybe buyers here, providers here, it's actually a very complex, as you know, interweb of buyers and suppliers. So there are certain streams of revenue that we don't include. For example, when a small translation LSI sells to a larger LSI, say a super agency like RWS or TransPerfect, in that transaction is not included in our market sizing. Only the revenue derived from the final buyer or derived by the end provider is included. So some of those complexities might be different as well in terms of how others size it. And most probably the other difference is methodology. So we look at the supply side. So what are the main verticals that are buying language solutions providers? And then we look at the provider side. So our map of who all of the large, small, medium LSIs are. What are their revenues? What do we understand about the total revenue being derived from enterprises, from government, from media? And we triangulate that to get to a figure. So it's most likely that some of the other figures out there, maybe they use a different methodology to get to that.
I had a bunch of questions that both of you touched on, and yeah, that's all great information. Particularly, I always wondered how people treated the revenue that generated the revenue because in our space, so common, right, for the large LSI to hire the smaller one that then hires the freelancer, and I always wondered if that would count like as three different revenue streams or as one. But what Florian said at the beginning, I appreciate a narrower definition because it's easier to actually treat it as something reliable. So at least my personal bias, I tend to agree with using a narrower versus a broader definition. And so if I'm understanding correctly, right, I think, and maybe people like me maybe got hung up on the terms. And what you're describing is something much bigger, right? It's like the market has shifted. You try to analyze this shift from the buyer perspective. What are these people buying? What are they needing? And also how the market is responding to that. The terms, they're subsequential. They're not that important. What's really important is that things are shifting very significantly. Is that understanding kind of correct?
I think you need the terms are important because also that's one of the reasons why we're here, because they do generate a lot of attention, right? And there's competing terms. Some of our friends have other terms and they're trying to launch other terms. So now it is a bit, okay, whose term's going to get picked up here? But maybe that's also a consequence of the industries just generally kind of becoming a little less defined, just kind of broadly, and a little less kind of one big family. So the terms are important, and we did think a lot about it, right? So if you look at something like a language solutions integrator, the term, I mean, there are systems integrators, right, who do that's kind of a standard term. So it's not one-to-one, and there's certain things that systems integrators don't do that our language solutions integrators do. But I think it's a fairly good term because it kind of has this familiarity to it from systems integrator and kind of has some conceptual similarities. Language technology platform is very plain, right? It's very plain, but it kind of, what do you say that? What do you call that? It does what it says on the tin or something. It is a language technology platform, and it's a platform that people do stuff on. It's not, again, these companies aren't typically responsible for the outcome, as opposed to the systems integrator, solutions integrators that are indeed responsible for that outcome. So to go back to your question, yes, I think those terms are important. We hope they're getting picked up and used. And we've seen, big companies like RWS mentioning it in their annual report, basically taking the framework as kind of their new framework. So this is a pretty big endorsement if like the largest publicly listed company takes it on. We've also seen smaller LSIs actually put it on their kind of hero statement on the website. And so, yeah, we're very glad to see it getting some traction. Maybe Anna, you have something to add there.
I mean, just to echo what you said, coming up with names that better communicate the value that these companies are bringing to the market was really key, and that was one of the rationales behind the Language Solutions Integrators decision. And then, as Florian said, language technology platform might seem a bit plain, but it's an extremely useful term for covering all of those different types of companies, from AI dubbing to AI speech translation, interpreting, language access, translation, all of that comes under all of the tools, applications, AI builders, orchestrators that enable those language transformations come under that umbrella.
If you make it too narrow, then you're going to miss a big chunk of like super interesting companies, right? If we say like, okay, this is a TMS, it's a translation management platform. What if it's like an AI dubbing platform? Is that like, it's not a translation management system, for example, right? Or like, I mean, I think the funniest one in the industry, the funniest acronym, and you started with that, Gabriel, is still to me is CAT. Like even like literally when I joined the industry, like back in the early 2000s, I'm like, what do you mean computer aided translation? Everything's computer aided anyway. So it's like, what are we doing here? So I guess that one's been sunset kind of 5 years ago. But yeah, so language technology platform, it's kind of specific enough to still delineate it, but it's broad enough to be a big umbrella for all this really, really cool stuff that's coming out now.
That's awesome. I mean, maybe the term has been sunset. I hear it all the time in all my calls with agencies, and people are always separating between CAT and business and this. I think that's part of my main concern over all of this shift, because I'm with you. I mean, I see the shift, and I agree with you that like the language technology platform, for instance, is a much better term because, like you said, there's so much amazing tech out there, whether it's for dubbing, whether it's for translating images using AI, whether it's for managing your translation workflows with AI like BureauWorks, whatever. There's really a lot of amazing tech out there, and I like where you draw the line in terms of like not being responsible for outcomes versus a language solution integrator. But then I also see, based on what you're describing, that this change kind of requires the typical language company, language agency, the language service provider, to become an integrator, right? They have to, in this vision, at least both of you are describing, this language agency, now they have to be way more tech savvy. They have to know how to pick from all of this tech stack that's available so that they can deliver their solutions to their clients. Am I correct in this understanding? I mean, do you think this shift is already happening? Do you think they're struggling? How do you see this playing out in practice?
I think the shift has happened certainly from the buyer expectation point of view as a starting point. So when buyers go to the market now looking for a language solutions integrator, or someone to manage their language transformation outcomes across modalities, they will certainly be expecting AI enablement. They would be surprised, for example, to find a translation company that doesn't use machine translation, or surprised to find even a media localization company that doesn't have AI dubbing, at least as an option. So I think the buyer perspective has changed. And on the provider side, it's, as you're saying, it's much more nuanced, and the LSI landscape is so incredibly fragmented that I think it will always be extremely nuanced. So I think it would be difficult to find a term that would accurately reflect the reality of, say, a small local LSI serving maybe local clients and maybe just using technology for linguistic asset management and maybe a little bit of AI here and there, and comparing that to what, say, RWS or TransPerfect are doing. So there's definitely that nuance. As to whether the name puts pressure on companies to change what they offer, I think the reality is already applying the pressure. And I think that the goal of the term is to capture, I guess, the forefront of where the industry is at the moment. And yeah, Florian, maybe you want to refine.
What catching up to, I think it's maybe not even the forefront, kind of the status, like the actual state right now. So it's, Gabriel, I don't think we're trying to get people to a certain point. I think we were struggling to use these outdated terms, in our view, LSP and TMS, to describe what's actually out there. So we started to feel a little bit outdated on our side. It's like, what are we talking about? A service provider looking at a company that has 30 connectors and, has 2, custom models for XYZ and provides 20 different services. We can't in good conscience call these companies service providers anymore. I mean, they have so much tech, right? And then, calling a company that has for example, a localization orchestration startup, what do we call them? A translation management system? No, they're emphatically not a translation management system. And then, so basically we felt that we're starting to feel behind the curve. So we needed something to kind of be much more confident communicating to the market that we're doing our work and we're doing our job, and we're not just kind of stuck in terms that maybe were great 10 years ago, but not anymore. And just one other comment. We don't mean to say that LSI and LTP, that this accurately and in nuance describes everything. I mean, if you look at the report and it's 158 pages, there's incredible additional nuance and differentiation between below that, right? So below the LTP label, there's probably 30 or 40 or 50 different categorizations for all the nuance. It's just that, sometimes you need one term to, have a normal conversation and not just always say, well, but there's more. But I'll pause there.
Well, no, I agree with the nuance, and I do agree with the fact that it's not necessarily proposing a new way of doing it. It's catching up with the status quo. I also agree with what Anna's saying in terms of this is just the buyer expectation period. But one of the things, just in terms of this nuance and asymmetry in the language solution integrator side, one of the things that really puzzles me is, and I do speak to maybe not as many agencies as you guys do, but I've probably had at least 500 different conversations over the past 2 years with different agencies about their workflows, their tech stack, what they do. And I mean, not just hallway conversations, hour-long demos with me asking questions and things like that. So I do have some kind of perspective on how broad the range is. And I think part of what surprises me is, and you've hinted at this, but there's a buyer expectation on one end, right? There's all this tech that's available, and there's a buyer expectation that things should be better, faster, cheaper. At least that's my basic, just reducing it. That's what buyers expect. And then on the language solution integrator side, I feel, and again, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I notice in general is, number one, I don't see, even though sometimes it's the case for them, like you mentioned, like they're managing all kinds of connectors and things, I don't necessarily see the tech expertise there. They're typically mostly focused on, they're really good at account managing and project managing, and they can get away with the tech sometimes, but they're not typically heavy stacked on the tech side in terms of just talent. It's like our space, in my opinion, at least, I don't see that many, proportionally speaking, right? I don't see that many, that much investment on tech people to run things. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is all this tech, if employed correctly, it maybe allows them to sell more, but ultimately will force them to reduce their pricing as well. And I also see a lot of resistance on that end. It's basically, and that's been historically how it's been with, at least with machine translation. I mean, sure, we'll maybe lower our pricing a little bit. We're basically going to use it to have more margin. And this time around, it just seems a little bit different. It seems like the pressure is a lot stronger from the buyer to see some of that benefit. So I don't know, that's kind of like a three-pronged question, but would love to hear your take on it.
So we as industry analysts, we look at kind of the impact and the size of the industry, and you have this long tail of providers, right? And you can have a lot of conversations with a lot of medium to small players. And I understand, like, I completely agree with you. The degree of sophistication is relatively low, actually sometimes like surprisingly low. But as you go up, the size and the complexity and the sophistication curve, yes, these companies do have, connectors, tech teams, developers. They have their proprietary products that they're selling. So we also cater very much to that segment of the market, right? And this is not thousands of companies. It's probably 100 plus, right? That are very sophisticated, very large, have, again, kind of sophisticated internal technology capabilities, have 1, 2, 3, maybe 10 different tech products as part of their own stack, and then they're using all kinds of third-party tech. So I guess it kind of depends which segment of the market you talk to. If you talk to kind of the longer tail, the hundreds or the thousands of smaller companies, or if you also have to focus on the very big companies that are incredibly sophisticated, up to companies that used to be 100% technology, and then kind of to scale further, they needed to add some solution integration to it and some kind of managed service component. And so those companies are essentially like technology at the heart, and they sometimes struggle to actually provide that little service layer that the long tail prides itself on, right? So that's one of my replies to this. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that there is this big gap, right, between maybe the larger players that have a lot of their own tech and a lot of their own tech teams. But even among the larger players, I still see a lot of asymmetry. I still see some of them, like you described, are tech developers themselves and have all their products and have big tech teams, and then they layer service onto it. Others are really trying to catch up and trying to add people and departments to make sure that they're up to date. But just in general, I think that this is perhaps the biggest thing is, in general, when I talk to the language solution integrators, and again, I agree with you that it's important to segment this generalization because it's different with different sizes of companies. But I do notice that there's a certain reactivity in terms of understanding, and this is the language service provider, right? The word service is very prominent. This idea of serving, this idea of you're the client, you tell me what you want, I give you what you need, right? And I hear that echoing throughout the space as well. So it's like if I start asking questions, well, why is something done this way? Well, because our client told us to do this way. Did you tell them that there's a better way of doing it? Yeah, I did. They didn't really want to hear it because they don't want to bother their engineering team, or they don't want to bother this. So, and it actually cascades because most localization buyers aren't that high up in their company orgs. So they're kind of also in a position where they don't want to rock the boat. So it's kind of like a lot of pressure that's going downstream in terms of how things are doing. I don't see that many people with that level of latitude to be able to say no, repropose something in a completely different way. And I think that kind of like cascades down, and especially into smaller buyers. And what I love about the terminology, the language solution integrator, is that the emphasis, you drop the service and you look into the solution, right? The solution is a much more proactive way of looking at the same thing. And I guess my question is, do you have any advice or recommendations for these language service providers on how to become solution integrators, how to change their thinking, how to change their way of approaching things?
Anna?
Oh, you've touched on so many different points, and my mind's gone in a couple of different directions. I just wanted to to maybe pick up on the point you mentioned about even with some of the larger buyers and some who are deriving their language solutions from very large companies, they're not always necessarily using the most sophisticated or the most complex technology-driven solutions. I think this comes down to just the complexity of making those changes across organizations. If we think about the organizations that buy language solutions in tech, healthcare, government, tech companies, continuing the day-to-day while making these huge changes to the underlying tech stack is obviously very difficult, and there's risk involved. And in some cases, also you mentioned, you touched on the prominence of localization to these companies. Sometimes it's not a very big spend from their point of view, and perhaps spending more on human-centric management rather than technology just makes more sense, rather than going into new territory and taking on new risks that might not necessarily be seen as worth it, even though there would be efficiency and cost benefits. And now I've completely forgotten the actual question you asked.
About the advice, let me say a couple of words there. It's actually an interesting presentation you can download by a publicly listed company called Straker Translations, or Straker now. They're listed, and so they need to publish all of their documentation. So about a couple of weeks ago, they published something that they face a trilemma, or they have faced a trilemma in the past. How to square, and I'm reading off of this document, invest in the future, ensure financial prudence, and maintain the core. And maintaining the core is what we just talked about. Like, you have some clients that they're pushing, but maybe are also some others are maybe more conservative, and you're squeezing out some good business and some good margin, but the margin's not that high that it would allow you to invest too much into the future. But you understand you need to invest in the future. So sometimes these LSIs, they're a little bit trapped sometimes. Like, the margins are quite tight. They understand that they do need to invest, so they're not irrelevant in 5 years from now. But they also want to be. They also have to maintain the core business, which may be jeopardized if you try to ram some crazy advanced solution down like a more conservative client's throat, and so you face these kind of three things: invest in the future, maintain a core, and ensure financial prudence. So yeah, it's just the margins are sometimes very tough, and this does make it very difficult for you to do all three things at the same time. You kind of have to sometimes disrupt yourself a little bit and maybe be able to let go of certain revenue streams because they're kind of holding you back on other things. So and then generally, the industry has changed, but fundamentally that services kind of DNA is still quite strong. It's that, like, people want to do everything to everybody, and every $1,000 spent that comes through your door, you want to deliver at the utmost amazingness and awesomeness, and that sometimes is a little bit distracting, maybe also when you have like a vision. I mean, for BeerWorks, it's different. You have a product, you're building the product. You have your feature requests. You probably have a pretty kind of good idea of what you want to do for somebody and what you don't want to do, and so it's a little different if you're in that services business.
I agree 100%. I think, and you talk about the trilemma, and I think one of the things that in this pre-tech world, right, it was relatively, I would say, a widespread practice, just like you're describing, that for a language service company, they couldn't say no to clients. So, maybe they were asking for a new language pair that they didn't work with before. They'll say yes, and they'll figure it out. Maybe it's interpreting, and they haven't done it before. They'll figure it out. Maybe it's dubbing. They'll figure it out. And they keep adding things to their portfolio and growing. And like you said, I think in a revenue-oriented world, that makes a lot of sense because you generate quite a bit of revenue that way. In an efficiency-operated world, it doesn't make that much sense because for each of these verticals that you add, sometimes you're creating all of this overhead just to manage, small dollars for maybe some very microservice of dubbing, and it just may not make sense, right? And I think you're talking about revisiting that and really being more critical about what you do. And maybe I'm reading too much into your question, into your statement, but I think part of the advice is becoming more specialized. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yes, but like there is something to no. So generally, yes, become more specialized, become more focused, be bold. Like put on your website only the stuff you can actually do, and your special list in and solutions you can actually integrate, because that kind of helps with lead flow. There is something to be said for the kind of taking everything and trying to scale up. I mean, we have a good example in the industry. Look at TransPerfect, right? I mean,
Right.
they took on everything and just try to, took them to $1 billion. So if you do that approach well, it can result in a pretty big company. And I doubt there's a lot that TransPerfect currently doesn't do in terms of services lines. So it kind of worked for them, but that's very tough. Then you have to have a very good sales organization and things like that are difficult to build up in their own frame. So yeah, generally I would recommend focus, kind of be bold in terms of also being able to say no to certain things and have your messaging quite kind of narrowed down on the things you're best at.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but I would love to hear from Rodrigo. Rodrigo, I've been monopolizing here the conversation. I'm pretty sure that you have some kind of question or comment in your mind.
No, it's all good. I think I'm loving, listening to everything. So one thing that I would like to share, because I'm coming from marketing automation industry before BureauWorks, and in marketing automation, we have a pretty famous map about tech solutions called MarTech. And they've been, publishing since, I don't know, the last 15 years or so. And then it's interesting when we see these new names and how we accommodate all these sub-streams and verticals. It's a way how I see the analyst, it's seeing the future. So I like to study the tools, of course, but also the categories that MarTech they provide. And it's really tough. It's really tough. I think I wouldn't like to be in your position, Florian and Anna, because, for example, we have some prospects. They are operating using HubSpot, but HubSpot as a TMS. They got HubSpot and they customize entirely all the service marketing tickets. All of that around, translation and jobs and tasks, and we have people using Notion. So we have people using Notion a lot, and customizing, creating all their translation workflows. So I can imagine how hard it is to set these boundaries between all these terms. And my question is that how you see this influence, because I see people comparing us to the usability of our tool to other platforms, like out of our industry. How do you see this strong influence that, and many small LSPs, medium LSPs, they are implementing Airtable and connecting all the dots using all of that, and that is out of your radar, right? In terms of I would say numbers and analysis. How do you see all these big tech? Because there is a sense that everybody now it's a kind of creator or a developer or any kind of a professional that can create stuff from scratch. How do you see this influence coming from all these other tech companies in our industry?
Just to clarify, you're talking about other companies such as Airtable and Notion integrating language AI capabilities, translation, and also providing workflow functionalities, and also, of course, they're integrating with other platforms as well. So this is a major trend that we've been covering over the last 2 years, that we've been calling translation as a feature because it creates a nice acronym, TAF, but really it's language AI as a feature. And so we see it as a potentially very disrupting trend, of course, because it has a huge influence, as you're saying, on buyer and user perceptions of how easy it should be to access things, to translate things, to adapt and modify and connect those processes to what they're doing day to day. And of course, if a user is able to access translation and live speech translation, AI dubbing within the platforms that they're using day to day in the enterprise, or the enterprise has a formal contract with those companies, then it's a much more seamless way of accessing language transformation capabilities. So potentially, yes, very disruptive. And yes, as you said, we don't include it within the market sizing itself, but we count it as an external influence. So we see, if you can imagine, we've got foundational AI at the base, that's OpenAI and Meta. We've got language solutions integrators and language technology platforms. And then we have kind of translation as a feature, as an external factor that could disrupt the industry, capture revenue by these different methods. But I think, well, as you know, it's very nuanced. I think, Florian, you recently put the spotlight on, for example, YouTube's AI dubbing capabilities. This would be a good example. And the gulf between the quality that comes from the language industry and the quality in that particular context. And we're talking a large, big tech company. This is their best effort at AI dubbing. Really fell short. So I think that's an interesting signal. Florian, do you want to pick up on how we see TAF?
Yeah, I don't want to start ranting about YouTube AI dubs anymore, because who knows? Maybe in 4 weeks they deployed another 100 engineers on it, and it's going to be amazing and awesome and voice cloned and lip synced. So who knows? But this TAF translation as a feature, big trend, right? So there's maybe even nuance in that. Rodrigo, you're saying, okay, somebody's managing the whole workflow in something like HubSpot or maybe Notion. So there you have maybe the workflow component. Like we also focused on just having that functionality of translation. Like you go to Canva and you can click translate my little asset here, boom, it's in Spanish or in Chinese, right? So that was something that just didn't exist 5 years ago. Now it exists everywhere. It's a threat, but it's also, a threat. Yes, it is a threat, and it has taken volume, and people are doing a lot more stuff that maybe would have found its way to an LSI in like a past world. On the other hand, it also kind of creates multilingual content. Like it boosts the ubiquity of multilingual content. So now everybody just expects things to be potentially in multiple languages. And hey, how can you not? Like, it's so easy to do. I do it in Canva, right? I do it in my little Adobe thing. I do it in HubSpot. So, but then if you do it at massive scale, usually the one-click thing doesn't work anymore, right? And if you have regulatory issues, if you have certain requirements for accuracy, if you maybe don't have a language combination in your little feature, then you need to go to a specialist, and then it becomes complex, and then you need a language solutions integrator. So, but yeah, this is a big external force that you have all these companies now integrating translation or multilingual content because of AI, because it's now much easier and people just demand it. Like before that, before ChatGPT, they would have had to go to, like a machine translation company, right? And that just wouldn't, this squeeze wouldn't have been worth the juice there. But now, I need AI. I need my little 3 stars on my product. So now we can also do translation. Boom. And
I think, LSIs and LTPs both have very defensible positions when you compare them to translation as a feature. As Florian mentioned, LSIs, you have the managed solutions, you have the experts in the loop, you have your linguist expertise. And on the LTP side, each year we do this exercise where we look at all of the new startups that are arriving on the scene and identify 50 of the most interesting under 50 months of age, the Slator 50 under 50. And so this gives us a really good snapshot of what's happening in the LTP space at any particular time. And what we could see this year is that LTPs are really congregating, if that's the right word, converging, gathering their offerings around solving specific buyer problems. So you will have LTPs dedicated to solving language access in healthcare settings. And they're bringing together multiple language AI capabilities like AI transcription, AI translation, AI speech translation, maybe access to expert in the loop via an LSI, or they're bringing together text translation and content creation and lots of other features that are designed to solve the whole buyer problem. And this is something that users will not get if they're simply accessing translation as a feature within HubSpot, or they're simply stringing together a workflow, because it's possible. It's not going to be the same as having a customized, well-designed language platform that every single aspect of the buyer's needs have been taken into consideration, from workflow to AI capabilities to plugging in the expert in the loop if needed, to all of the regulatory concerns that, say, a healthcare company or a government buyer might need. So I think that's a real, I guess, the strength of the language industry there.
Yeah, I mean, my mind is just spinning with so much great things that both of you said. So one of the things that I just want to validate is on the language technology platform front, there's a certain trend towards super specialization of the solution, right? In terms of like you mentioned, like a super specialized dubbing for the healthcare industry. And I do think that this is just my personal bias, but I do think that that's the overall direction of tech. I think that the more specialized it becomes, the more value it can add. It's really hard to be good at everything. Even in services, and if it's hard in services, it's way harder in tech. So I do tend to agree with that. And then we see like this juxtaposition, right, where on one hand, the language technology platforms are, let's say, in a deeper trend towards specialization, and then the language solution integrators, they kind of have to balance this with being able to offer their clients what they need and juggle a lot of these different kinds of solutions, at least like in terms of what things could look like. That's kind of like a scenario. Am I wrong? What you're describing, at least what I'm understanding, is the language technology platforms, they tend to be super specific, especially more recent ones. They tend to be very specific. I'm really good at like translating images, for instance, or I'm really good at this kind of audio or this language pair. And then you have a language solution integrator that does that job of figuring out for their clients, okay, now I need to deliver this e-learning, for instance, and for this e-learning, I'm going to use this tool and that tool and this tool and this combination. I'm going to put together all of these different platforms to create my service offering or my solution, right? Am I understanding correctly?
Yes, language technology platforms are taking on some of these specialized functions that relate specifically to industry, and they are underpinned by an understanding of the industry needs. And as you're pointing out, that's one of the things that LSIs were and are particularly good at providing from a human perspective. But I guess, this is really the direction of technology in general, especially with, I guess, AI agents, but as well, and the design of solutions, is that the goal is to get more and more attuned, aligned, customized, and anticipating buyer needs, and to the extent possible, automating those, streamlining those, leaving a smaller part for humans to be involved in.
I think, Gabriel, you're painting a scenario whereby, you have these ever more niche and more capable like technology providers, and then the LSIs, like, building a solution out of it so that's accurate. If the overall, or if a buyer doesn't want to compile all these solutions into one, or so they can deliver them at scale. If you're an LSI, maybe one consequence or the ever more specialized nature of these companies generally also has to do that the plain act of like volume translation is in a sense has been commoditized by these big tech companies, kind of offer it practically for free or completely for free, right? So if you just want to have an okay, well translated kind of document, sure, you just plug it into Google Translate for free, or use your Google Workspace functionality, and whoops, it gets translated. So now you have to offer, just to even make money, to stay in business or to get your first clients if you're a startup, you have to have a pretty compelling solution that makes people come to you instead of just putting it into their Microsoft Workspace or Google Workspace, or building it themselves in like AWS or something. So and that's also, I guess, a general, to maybe sound a little grand, but like just this general improvement of technology, things that you weren't able to do 5 years ago, now you can, right? We just had a conversation in our podcast with Deepak Patel from Globo, very much focused on healthcare interpreting, and they're trialing now AI interpreting in certain scenarios, very niche, and this stuff wasn't possible 3-4 years ago. Now it is. Right. But even there, it's a very nuanced picture.
Well, this is amazing. I could go on for hours and hours, but we're pretty much at our time. And I want to thank both of you so much for all of the amazing insights. I learned a ton. This was great. And also want to ask you if our viewers that want to know more about Slator potentially get a look at the reports that you were describing, the 158-page one, what should people do if they want to get to know more about your work?
Just go to slator.com, live with the fact that the website's now 4+ years old, but you'll find your way around. We're working on a relaunch. You can subscribe, you can listen to our weekly podcast. So there's a lot of stuff that's available for free, and for deeper dives, just get a subscription. So.
All right.
Yep.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Anna. Really a huge pleasure having both of you, and thanks, Rodrigo, as well. And till next time.